The wedding was exactly what we'd planned. Everything went off without a hitch, and everyone kept saying it was the most beautiful ceremony they'd ever seen. For 2 weeks on our honeymoon, I felt like I was floating. I was a wife. I was starting my real life. But a few months after we got back home, a strange feeling started to creep in. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like a low, constant hum of anxiety. I'd lay in bed at night and my mind would just race over nothing. Did I lock the door? Did I remember to pay that bill? What if something happens to him at work? It was a constant, pointless loop of worry that I couldn't switch off. My chest felt tight all the time, like I was waiting for bad news. I should have been happy. I had a new husband who I loved, and we were building a life together. But this feeling was tainting everything. After a few weeks of it, I decided I should probably talk to a doctor. It felt like the responsible adult thing to do. I made an appointment with my general practitioner. I remember sitting on the paper-covered table in the exam room, explaining how I felt. I told him about the wedding, how I thought I should be on top of the world. But instead, I just felt anxious. He nodded along, looking at his chart. He didn't seem concerned at all. He told me this was incredibly common, especially after a major life change like getting married. He called it an adjustment disorder with anxiety. He said he had the perfect thing for it. He wrote me a prescription for an SSRI, one of the most common ones. He assured me it was a completely safe, standard, first-line treatment. It's non-habit forming, he said, and it has virtually no side effects for most people. It'll just take the edge off and get you back to feeling like yourself. I walked out of that office feeling so relieved. I had a name for what I was feeling and a solution in my hand. It was just a simple chemical imbalance that a little white pill could fix. I thought this was the first step to getting my life, my real married life, back on track. I had no idea that filling that prescription would be the biggest mistake I ever made. I started taking the medication the very next morning. For the first week, not much changed. The anxiety was still there, just a little quieter. The doctor said it could take a couple of weeks to kick in, so I was patient. I was doing the right thing. Then, about 10 days in, something shifted. It wasn't gradual. It felt like a switch was flipped on inside my head. The anxiety wasn't just gone. It was replaced by a clean, powerful wave of euphoria. I felt incredible. I only needed to sleep for 3 or 4 hours a night. But I'd wake up buzzing with a boundless energy. My mind, which used to race with worries, was now racing with brilliant ideas. Everything seemed connected. Everything was deeply significant. I thought to myself, this is what normal people must feel like. The pill was working perfectly. I was working a stable but boring office job at the time. It paid the bills and I was good at it. But in this new state of mind, it felt like a prison. It was a waste of my potential. One night, around 3 a.m., I was pacing around our apartment, too full of energy to lie down. An idea hit me with the force of a divine revelation. I was going to start a business creating bespoke, artisanal ice cubes for high-end bars. Not just frozen water, but intricate spheres with edible flowers, herbs, and exotic spices frozen right into the center. It was genius. It was going to make us rich. The idea completely and utterly consumed me. I spent the next 2 days wide awake, scribbling in notebooks, designing a logo, researching silicone tray manufacturers. My husband would ask me what I was doing, and I'd just say I was on the verge of something huge. He was worried. But I told him he just didn't see the vision yet. This feeling was better than anything I'd ever felt. It was pure power. The next morning, I went into work. I walked straight into my manager's office, told him I was leaving to pursue a revolutionary new venture, and that my last day was today. He was shocked. He tried to get me to take a few days to think about it, but I just smiled. I knew what I was doing. I packed up my desk, walked out into the bright sunshine, and felt a profound sense of freedom. I was finally on the right path. I felt invincible. The business needed capital. It was the logical next step. That afternoon, I sat at our kitchen table and logged into our online banking. We had a joint savings account, one we'd been carefully contributing to since we got engaged. It was for a down payment on a house. It was our future. I didn't hesitate. I transferred the entire balance, every single penny, into my personal checking account. I remember seeing the number, a little over $32,000, and feeling a jolt of pure power. This was the fuel for my rocket ship. My husband came home from work that evening to find the living room filled with boxes. I had ordered 3 commercial-grade freezers, hundreds of silicone sphere molds from an overseas supplier, and a vacuum sealer. I'd even made a down payment on a delivery van. I was explaining my shipping and logistics plan to him when his face went pale. He was looking at his phone. He had gotten the bank alert. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "The savings account, it's empty." I just smiled at him, a wide, buzzing smile. I told him this was it. This was our big break. I tried to explain the beauty of it, the intricate floral designs, the way the spiced cubes would transform a simple cocktail into an experience. I told him that in 6 months, we'd be laughing about how we ever worried about money. But he wasn't smiling. He just kept shaking his head. "That was our house fund," he said. "That was for our family. You quit your job and spent our life savings on fancy ice?" His voice cracked on the last word. And that's when it happened. The clean, bright energy I'd been feeling turned sour. A cold, dark suspicion crept into my mind. He wasn't worried. He was threatened. He didn't want me to be successful. He wanted me to stay in that boring office job, to be small, to rely on him. The medication had given me clarity, and now I could see the truth. His loving concern felt like an attack. His fear felt like a cage. "You don't believe in me," I said. My voice was low now, too. "You're just like everyone else. You want to see me fail." He tried to reason with me, tried to put his arms around me, but I pulled away. I looked at the man I had married just a few months before, the man I had promised my life to, and I didn't see a partner. I saw an obstacle. I saw an enemy. I had to get out of there. I couldn't breathe in that apartment. His face, his voice, his fear. It was all poison. It was trying to trap me, to pull me back down into the small, gray life I had just escaped. I grabbed my keys, but not my wallet or my phone. I didn't need them. I walked out the door without looking back at him. The night air was cool and electric. The city wasn't just a collection of streets and buildings anymore. It was a single, living organism. I could see the energy flowing through it. The headlights of the cars weren't just lights. They were tracers, drawing the lines of a massive, intricate equation. The rhythm of the traffic lights, the hum of the power lines, the distant wail of a siren. It wasn't noise. It was music. I started walking, faster and faster, letting the energy pull me along. It all became so clear. It wasn't just my ice cube business. That was just a tiny piece of a much grander truth I was discovering. The universe wasn't governed by gravity and friction. It was governed by harmony, by flow. Everything moved in a current, a predictable wave. Accidents, collisions, mistakes. They only happened when something or someone fell out of that universal rhythm. But I could see it. I could feel the rhythm in my bones. I was in sync with it. I found myself at a huge, busy intersection. Cars were flying through from 6 different directions. To anyone else, it would look like chaos. But to me, it was a perfect, intricate dance. I could see the paths. I could see the empty spaces between the cars, the pockets of calm in the storm. I knew, with a certainty that was more real than my own name, that I could walk through it. The flow would part for me. I wouldn't be a person walking into traffic. I would be a note of music joining the chord. I took a deep breath and smiled. This was the ultimate test. My proof. I stepped off the curb. For a second, it was perfect. The air rushed past me. A horn blared, not in anger, but in greeting. A red car saw me and swerved gracefully, a dancer moving around its partner. But then the red car hit a blue truck. The harmony was broken by a horrible grinding sound of metal on metal. Then another horn. A screech of tires that sounded like a scream. Then another crash, much louder, as a van plowed into the back of the truck. Glass shattered. More screaming. The whole symphony had collapsed into a mess of torn metal and broken glass and human-sized obstacles. I just stood there, in the middle of the street, as the chaos I created spun around me. The next thing I remember is a white ceiling. The fluorescent lights above it hummed, a flat, dead sound. There was no music, no energy, just a deep, bone-crushing exhaustion. I was in a bed with crisp, stiff sheets, and when I tried to sit up, I realized my wrist was tethered to the bed rail with a soft restraint. I was wearing a thin paper gown. The room was small and bare, with a heavy door that had no handle on the inside. A doctor came in, a woman with a calm face and tired eyes. She asked me simple questions. Did I know my name? Did I know where I was? I told her I was in a hospital. I asked her what happened. She spoke in a very even voice. She said I had been brought in by the police after causing a multi-car accident. She said I was lucky to be alive, that no one else was seriously hurt. She told me my husband had been looking for me, that he was the one who told the paramedics about the new medication. She then explained it to me, slowly, like she had explained it 100 times before. The SSRI I was taking, the one for my adjustment disorder, was like throwing gasoline on a hidden fire. It had triggered a full-blown manic episode. She said the correct diagnosis wasn't anxiety. It was bipolar I disorder. Bipolar. The word just hung there in the air. I thought about the artisanal ice, the $32,000, walking into traffic. It wasn't a spiritual awakening. It wasn't genius. It was a symptom. My husband hadn't been an enemy trying to hold me back. He had been watching his wife lose her mind. I was in that psychiatric ward for 3 weeks. My husband visited once. He looked thin and tired. He told me he couldn't do it anymore. He said he had filed for a divorce. He didn't say it with anger. He just said it with a final kind of sadness. I walked out of that hospital with a new prescription for a mood stabilizer and a diagnosis that would follow me for the rest of my life. In a matter of weeks, the simple cure for a little bit of sadness had cost me my marriage, our life savings, and my job. I had tried to fix a small crack, and in the process, I had brought the whole building down. For 30 years, my hands were my life. I'm a jeweler, a master craftsman. My whole world existed in the tiny space seen through my loupe. Setting a perfect pave, shaping a bezel, twisting gold into delicate filigree. It all depended on two things: a rock-steady hand and an eagle eye. My father was a jeweler, and his father before him. That precision, that control, it wasn't just my job. It was my identity. It was who I was. Then the pain started. It began as a dull ache in my right wrist, the one I used for fine motor control. I ignored it, thinking it was just fatigue. But the ache grew into a sharp, shooting pain that radiated up my forearm. My grip started to weaken. Sometimes, in the middle of a delicate solder, my hand would twitch, just a tiny, involuntary tremor. To anyone else, it would be nothing. To me, it was a catastrophe. I started ruining pieces. My hands, the source of my pride and my livelihood, were betraying me. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach every single morning. After I botched a simple prong setting on a 2-carat diamond, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I made an appointment with my family doctor. I sat in his office, explaining the pain, the tremors, how I couldn't do my work. I felt ashamed just talking about it, like I was admitting a fundamental failure. He listened, had me do a few movements with my wrist, and nodded. He called it a classic case of repetitive strain injury. He said it was common in my profession. Then he smiled, like he had great news. He told me there was a drug that worked wonders for this kind of nerve pain. He pulled out his prescription pad and started writing. He said it was a gabapentinoid, and he was putting me on a high dose to get it under control quickly. He tore the sheet from the pad and handed it to me. "This stuff is a lifesaver," he said. "It'll knock that pain right out. And the best part is, it's non-addictive, completely safe." I felt a wave of relief so powerful, it almost made me dizzy. A non-addictive wonder drug. It was the answer to a prayer. I walked out of that clinic holding the prescription like it was a winning lottery ticket, with no idea that the doctor's words were a lie that would cost me everything. The first pill was like a switch being flipped. Within an hour, the deep, burning ache in my wrist just disappeared. It was gone. Completely. I could rotate my wrist and make a fist with no pain at all. I went to my workbench and picked up my pliers, my graver. My grip was strong. The pain that had been a constant shadow for months had just vanished. I thought the doctor was right. This stuff really was a wonder drug. I felt like I had my life back. But after a few days on the high dose, something else started to happen. My thoughts felt slow and thick, like I was trying to think through a heavy blanket. My wife would be talking to me, and I'd lose the thread of the conversation halfway through. I'd walk into a room and just stand there, with no idea why I came in. People who took this stuff sometimes called it GABA brain, a stupid name for a stupid, foggy feeling. Then came the new tremors. It wasn't like the sudden, sharp nerve twitches I got from the pain before. This was different. It was a fine, constant vibration in my fingers, almost a hum, like a low-voltage current was running through them. I'd hold my hands out and just watch them shake, this slight but uncontrollable motion. They didn't feel like my hands anymore. They felt like unreliable tools. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my body adjusting to the medication. But then I was at the bench, working on a simple polish for a silver ring, a job I could do in my sleep. As I brought the piece to the buffing wheel, my hand trembled. Not a lot, but just enough. The wheel caught the edge and sent a deep, ugly gouge right across the face of the band. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt a hot flush of shame. I immediately pulled the ring back and turned so my back was to the rest of the workshop, hiding what I'd done. No one had seen. I spent the next hour carefully sanding and repolishing the band, erasing my mistake. The drug had taken the pain away, but it had given me this instead. This was worse. The pain was an injury. This felt like a fundamental flaw. It felt like I was the one who was breaking. The job arrived a week later. It was the kind of commission that comes along once in a career. A full restoration of a Victorian-era emerald and diamond necklace. It was priceless, intricate, and the client was one of the biggest collectors in the country. This job would solidify my reputation for the rest of my life. Everything went perfectly until the very last step. The final piece of the job was to reset the central emerald. It was a massive, hand-cut stone, an original from the 1880s, completely irreplaceable. The setting was a delicate claw mount made of impossibly thin gold. It was the most delicate work I had ever attempted. I sat down at my workbench and positioned the loop in my eye. I looked at the necklace, then at my hands. They were trembling. That fine, constant vibration from the medication was still there. Maybe even worse because of the pressure. My heart was pounding. I knew with absolute certainty that if I tried to do this now, I would wreck it. I would snap one of the claws or scratch the face of the stone. The panic was pure ice water in my veins. I backed away from the bench. I thought about the GABA brain, the fog that made me feel so slow and stupid. But then I thought about the pain being gone. My logic was twisted by fear. I needed my hands to be steady. I needed my mind to be sharp, just for an hour, just long enough to finish this. I walked to the kitchen and took the pill bottle out of the cabinet. I looked at the label, at the prescribed dose. Then I thought about the necklace waiting for me. I needed more. The thought was immediate and powerful. More would make it stop. More would make me steady. I twisted the cap off and shook 2 capsules into my palm instead of 1. I swallowed them with a glass of water and went back to my workshop. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing deeply, waiting. The fog started to roll in, but the tremor in my hands seemed to lessen. It felt like the right call. The only call. I put the loop back to my eye, looked at the emerald sparkling under the light, and picked up my tweezers. I sat there for maybe a full minute, just breathing. The heavy fog from the extra pill was rolling in, thick and slow, but the tremor in my fingers seemed to have stopped. It worked. My hand felt steady. It felt like my own again. I thought, I can do this. Just this one last thing. I picked up my finest tweezers, the ones I used for the most delicate work. I used them to carefully pick up the emerald. Through the loop, the stone was a world of its own, a deep green universe. The antique gold claws of the setting looked as thin as threads. The whole world shrank down to that tiny point of contact. I brought the stone down, slowly, carefully. The tip of the emerald was just millimeters from its home. My breathing was shallow. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just a little bit more. Just guided into place. Then it happened. It wasn't a gradual tremor. A violent, electric jolt shot down my arm. The double dose hadn't steadied me. It had poisoned me. My hand convulsed, a spasm I had no control over. The tweezers clenched shut with all the force of my panicked grip. There was a sound, a quiet, horrible crunching sound. The sound of soft, thin, 100-year-old gold collapsing. It wasn't a snap. It was a crush. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. The tweezers dropped from my fingers and clattered on the bench. I slowly took the loop from my eye and stared at the necklace. The delicate filigree around the central setting was a mangled wreck. The thin claws that were meant to hold the emerald were bent and broken, twisted into a knot of ruined gold. The piece was destroyed, not damaged, not in need of repair. It was completely and utterly ruined. I just sat there, staring at the wreckage. My hands, the hands that were supposed to create and restore, had just destroyed a masterpiece. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the mangled gold. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. The fog from the pills was so thick. Eventually, I stood up on shaky legs, walked to the office, and called my boss. I didn't try to make excuses. I just told him what I did. He didn't yell. His voice was quiet, dead. He just said he was on his way. He walked into the workshop, took one look at the necklace on my bench, and then looked at me. There wasn't anger in his eyes, just a deep, final disappointment. It was worse than anger. He told me I was fired for gross negligence. He said the insurance would cover some of it, but my name, my professional reputation, was gone. He was right. The jewelry world is small. The story was everywhere in a week. I wasn't a master craftsman anymore. I was a cautionary tale. That night, I went home and took the prescription bottle out of the medicine cabinet. I just looked at it. I thought about the violent spasm, the sound of the gold crushing. The drug had done this, not me. The drug. I opened the kitchen trash can and dropped the bottle in. It landed with a soft clink. I was done with it. I decided to just stop. Cold turkey. That was a mistake. A horrible mistake. The doctor said the drug was safe, that it wasn't addictive. He lied. Within a day, the withdrawal hit me like a physical assault. It started with a cold sweat, a feeling of pure dread that filled my chest. My hands started to shake. But this was a whole-body tremor, a violent, uncontrollable shivering that made my teeth chatter. The pain in my wrist came roaring back, 10 times worse than before. It felt like my bones were on fire. For 3 nights, I didn't sleep. I just lay in the dark, my body drenched, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out. I was having panic attacks so bad I thought I was dying. My wife begged me to go to the hospital, but I wouldn't. A doctor put me here. I would never trust one again. When the worst of the withdrawal was finally over, I was just a wreck. A hollowed-out man. The pain was back for good, and my hands were now so unsteady I could barely sign my own name. My career was over. My purpose was gone. The irony was so bitter it would have been funny if it wasn't my life. The medicine I took to save my hands, to preserve my craft, was the very thing that destroyed it all. The divorce was one thing, but the custody battle was a special kind of hell. My ex-husband seemed to have an endless supply of money for lawyers, and his new mission in life was to prove I was an unfit mother. The stress was a constant, physical weight. It settled behind my eyes and in my chest, and at night, it kept me wide awake. Sleep just wouldn't come. I would lie in bed for hours, my heart pounding, my mind replaying every conversation with my lawyer, every cold email from my ex. I was exhausted down to my bones. I was snapping at my kids. I was barely functioning at work. I felt like I was losing my mind. Slowly, one sleepless night at a time, I was desperate. After one night where I didn't sleep a single minute, I made an appointment with my doctor. I remember just sitting in his office and crying. I told him I was so tired I couldn't think straight, that I was afraid I was going to lose my kids just because I was too exhausted to fight. He was very sympathetic. He said the stress was causing chronic insomnia and that we needed to break the cycle. He wrote me a prescription for Ambien. He told me it was a very effective sleep aid and that it would just shut my brain off so my body could get the rest it needed. The relief was overwhelming. A little pill could make it all stop. That night, I took one right before getting into bed. The last thing I remember is my head hitting the pillow. The next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. It was morning. 8 hours of solid, dreamless black sleep. I felt human again. It felt like a miracle. A few days later, though, I woke up and went into the kitchen to make coffee. There was a bowl on the counter. Inside it was a half-eaten mix of dry cereal and pickle relish, with a spoon sticking out of it. I had absolutely no memory of making it or eating it. I just stared at it, confused. I threw the weird concoction in the trash and didn't think much more of it. It happened again a few nights later, this time with a bag of chips dipped in yogurt. I thought it was just a funny side effect, a harmless quirk. Compared to the life-saving sleep I was getting, a few weird midnight snacks seemed like a price I was more than willing to pay. I had no idea that I wasn't just sleep snacking, I was blacking out. The weird snacks were just the beginning. A few nights later, I woke up feeling fantastically rested. I walked out of my bedroom, heading for the kitchen, and I just stopped dead in the hallway. The entire living room was rearranged. The sofa was pushed against the far wall, the chairs were in a tight circle in the middle of the room, and the heavy oak coffee table was upside down on the rug. All the pictures on the walls had been turned around to face the plaster. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but nothing was stolen. The TV was still there, my laptop was on the counter. The only explanation was that I had done it. I had spent hours in the middle of the night, silently moving heavy furniture, and I had no memory of it at all. A cold, sick feeling started to unspool in my stomach. Then it got worse. I logged onto my computer at work and saw I had a few new messages on social media. One was from an old college friend. It just said, "Are you okay? Your posts last night were really weird." I had no idea what she was talking about. I clicked on my profile, and my heart dropped. I had apparently been posting for hours the night before, but it wasn't me. It was long, rambling paragraphs of absolute nonsense. I had written a detailed, 1,000-word theory about how traffic lights were a sentient network communicating with squirrels. I argued with people in the comments, but my replies didn't make any sense. They were just jumbles of words. Seeing my name, my face, next to those bizarre, insane thoughts was horrifying. This wasn't just sleepwalking anymore. It felt like someone else was borrowing my body while I was asleep. A stranger. I started to think of her as my ambient self. This other me was a completely different person. She had strange ideas and boundless energy. She moved furniture and had long, nonsensical conversations with people I knew. I was no longer just going to sleep. I was blacking out and handing the keys to my life over to someone I didn't know and couldn't control. Every night, as I swallowed that little pill, a new kind of dread took hold. I wasn't afraid of not sleeping anymore. I was afraid of what I'd wake up to. I was afraid of her. The phone call with my ex was about scheduling a weekend with our son. It ended with him telling me he was going to prove to a judge that I was an unstable wreck, and that he'd use every resource he had to take our child away from me for good. His voice was cold and calm. He meant every word. When the call ended, I just stood there in the kitchen, holding the dead phone. My hands started to shake, and then my whole body. A sound came out of me, a horrible, choking sob. His words were just circling in my head on a loop. Unstable, unfit, a danger. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I wouldn't even be able to lie down. The thought of the long, black night ahead, with just those words for company, was unbearable. I walked into the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. The orange bottle was right there. I stared at it, thinking about the rearranged furniture, the insane things I'd written online. I thought about the stranger who took over my life when I checked out. A part of me screamed not to do it, but the fear of my own thoughts was worse. The terror of lying awake for 8 hours, dissecting every word, feeling that hope drain out of me, was so much bigger than the fear of what she might do. I just wanted the pain to stop. Without another thought, I twisted the cap off, shook one pill into my shaking hand, and dry swallowed it. I needed the silence. I needed the escape. I stumbled to my bed and got under the covers, curling into a tight ball. I felt the familiar chemical fog begin to roll in, and for a second there was relief. Then came the dread. I was handing the keys over. I was letting her out. The jarring sound of my phone ringing on the nightstand ripped me out of the blackness. I fumbled for it, my eyes still gritty and unfocused. The caller ID was a picture of my lawyer. It was just after 7 in the morning. My heart gave a single, hard thud. I answered, "Hello?" His voice wasn't warm. It was flat and cold and professional. "I just received your email," he said. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I didn't know what he was talking about. I just made a confused sound. There was a long pause on his end, then the sound of a sharp sigh. "I am going to read this back to you," he said. And he did. He read an email that had been sent from my account to his at 3:15 in the morning. An email I had zero memory of writing. The voice on the phone read my words back to me. A calm, lucid confession. It stated, with terrifying clarity, that my claims against my ex-husband were fabrications, that I had exaggerated his behavior and invented incidents of instability to create an unfair advantage in our custody proceedings. The email was articulate, detailed, and used precise legal phrasing. It was a perfect, voluntary retraction of everything we had been fighting for. It ended with a single, clear instruction. Based on this, you are to immediately file to withdraw my petition for sole custody and cease all work on my case. This is my final decision. I just sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed hard against my ear. My body felt numb and cold. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I was just listening to a stranger's voice describe how I had just destroyed my own life. "I have to be honest," my lawyer said, his voice now just weary. "This is the most thorough and self-incriminating document I have ever seen a client produce. You've not only ended your case, you've handed him all the ammunition he ever needed." He hung up. I put the phone down and walked into the living room. I sat down at my laptop and opened my sent mail. There it was, the timestamp, the cold, formal paragraphs. It wasn't the rambling gibberish of the ambient self I'd seen before. This was written by someone else, someone calm and intelligent and methodical, someone who wanted me to lose everything. She had finally done it. I called him back instantly. The words just fell out of me in a frantic, panicked rush. That wasn't me. I didn't write that. I was sleeping. I took Ambien. You have to tell him it wasn't me. I tried to explain about the blackouts, about the other me. But the words sounded insane, even to my own ears. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When my lawyer finally spoke, all the partnership, all the friendly confidence we'd built was gone. His voice was cold and tired. He said he would make the calls, he would try to walk it back. But that I had to understand the damage was done. He said the woman who wrote that email sounded sane, lucid, and credible. My phone call to him now just sounded like a panicked, unstable person trying to undo a moment of honesty. He was right, of course. My ex-husband didn't believe the retraction for a second. To him, the Ambien self was the real me, finally admitting the truth. The frantic walk-back was just more proof of my manipulative behavior. The trust wasn't just shattered, it had been ground into a fine powder. I had handed him the perfect weapon, and my own lawyer now looked at me like I was a live grenade. The case was over. I had lost. But as I sat there in the quiet of my living room, a much deeper and colder horror started to sink in. The legal trouble was one thing. I could eventually survive losing the case. But this was different. This wasn't the confused, rambling person who ate weird food and posted nonsense online. This was someone else. The person who wrote that email was intelligent. She was calm and methodical. She used a cold, precise language that was perfectly designed to destroy my life in a single, surgical strike. She wasn't just a weird quirk of a sleeping pill. She was a saboteur who shared my face and my name. The true horror wasn't losing my son. It was realizing that a part of my own mind wanted me to. She was a prisoner in my body, and she was trying to get me evicted. And all she had to do was wait for me to fall asleep. For 12 years, I was a high school history teacher. My world was ordered and predictable. Bells rang at specific times. The curriculum was set. My life was built around routine, and I liked it that way. I've always been a quiet person, someone who avoids confrontation. I was the teacher who would rather give a student an extra day on an assignment than have an argument about it. My classroom was my sanctuary, a calm, controlled space. Then the pain started. I have a condition called ankylosing spondylitis. Most of the time, with my regular medication, it was just a dull, manageable ache in my lower back. But this was different. This was a flare-up from hell. It felt like someone had driven a hot spike into my spine and was slowly filling my joints with concrete. I couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't sit. I couldn't lie down. Every tiny movement was a fresh wave of blinding, electrical pain. I had to take medical leave from school. The quiet order of my life was gone, replaced by hours spent shuffling around my house, hunched over like an old man, unable to think about anything but the fire in my own bones. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was becoming desperate, living in a constant state of agony. After a week of this, I got an emergency appointment with my rheumatologist. I remember hobbling into his office, barely able to get myself onto the exam table. I told him I couldn't live like this, that I'd do anything to make it stop. He listened, nodded, and told me we needed a sledgehammer for this. He was going to put me on a massive dose of prednisone to shock my system and crush the inflammation. He wrote the prescription, and as he handed it to me, he smiled. He told me it would work fast, and it would work well. "Just so you know," he said, "a big dose like this can make you feel a little edgy. Maybe give you some extra energy." A little edgy? I barely even heard that part. All I heard was that this piece of paper was the answer. It would stop the pain. As I walked out of the office, I felt a kind of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. I could handle being a little edgy. I couldn't handle another minute of this pain. I had absolutely no idea that his words were the biggest understatement of my life. The first dose of prednisone was a miracle. Within hours, the fire in my spine just went out. The pain that had been screaming for a week was reduced to a dull, distant throb. It was like a switch had been flipped. I could stand up straight. I could walk without wincing. That night, I didn't sleep. Not a single minute. But I wasn't tired. The doctor's word, edgy, was completely wrong. It was a clean, humming energy, a feeling of absolute power buzzing just under my skin. My thoughts, usually slow and methodical, were now moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Plans, ideas, connections. Everything was lighting up in my brain. I felt incredible. I thought, this isn't a side effect. This is what I'm supposed to feel like. I was finally fixed. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay home. I was too full of this new energy. I was cured. I got dressed, got in my car, and went back to school. Standing in front of my first period class felt different. The familiar rhythm of the room, the shuffling of papers, the low murmur of teenage chatter. It all sounded wrong. The humming in my own veins was louder. My heart was thumping a fast, hard beat against my ribs. I tried to start my lesson on the Industrial Revolution, but I couldn't focus on the textbook. I could only focus on them. I saw 2 students in the back corner whispering. One of them glanced in my direction and then quickly looked away. They weren't just talking. I knew it. It was about me. They were talking about my medical leave. They thought I was faking it. They thought I was weak. The whispers weren't just whispers. They were judgments. Then, a girl in the 3rd row passed a folded note to the boy next to her. He unfolded it under his desk, read it, and a small smirk crossed his face. He looked at me for just a split second. That was it. That was the proof. It wasn't a note. It was a report. They were documenting my behavior. They were building a case against me in my own classroom. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. It made perfect, terrifying sense. They were plotting. It was a conspiracy to get me fired. Every glance, every whisper, every stifled laugh was part of it. The quiet sanctuary of my classroom had become enemy territory, and I was completely surrounded. Parent-teacher conferences started that afternoon. The school day ended, but the buzzing in my veins didn't. I sat at my desk, arranging papers that didn't need arranging. The energy from the prednisone made me feel like I was vibrating in my own skin. Every time the classroom door opened, I felt a jolt of alarm. My quiet sanctuary was now a stage, and every parent who walked in felt like a new judge taking their seat. At 4 o'clock, the door opened again. It was the mother of the boy who had read the note. Michael's mom. She was a small, older woman, probably in her late 70s, with white hair and a kind, wrinkled smile. She moved slowly, carefully, and everything about her seemed gentle. I tried to act normal. I motioned for her to sit in the chair across from my desk. I pulled out Michael's file. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure she could hear it. I couldn't stop thinking about the note, about the smirk on his face. This woman had raised him. She had to know. I started talking about Michael's last test score, about his participation in class. The words felt like they belonged to someone else. She just listened patiently, nodding. She seemed sweet, concerned. Then she gave a soft little laugh. It was a warm, grandmotherly sound. "He tells me your class is very difficult," she said. her voice gentle. He says you're the toughest teacher he's ever had. And that was it. The whole world snapped into focus. The kind smile, the slow movements, the gentle voice. It was all a performance. This wasn't a parent-teacher conference. It was a confrontation. Toughest teacher. It wasn't a complaint. It was a threat. She was delivering a message from the soldiers in her son's army. I looked at her, at this sweet old woman, and I saw a mastermind. Her kindness was a disguise. Her concern was an interrogation. She was the one pulling the strings. She was testing me, seeing how I would react. My mouth went dry. I didn't say anything back. I just stared at her. I watched her smile start to fade. The kindness in her eyes was replaced with confusion, and then a flicker of fear. The conference was over. I don't remember what I said to make her leave. I think I just nodded and pushed the file across the desk. She stood up, gathered her purse, and left my classroom without looking back. I sat there in the silence, the buzzing in my head now a roar. The conspiracy wasn't just a few teenagers passing notes. It was bigger. It was organized. The parents were in on it. This was a coordinated attack, and they had just sent their most cunning agent to deliver a warning. The door clicked shut, and the room was suddenly silent. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a high-pitched metallic hum, a sound that was coming from inside my own skull. Her words just echoed in that ringing noise. Toughest teacher. Toughest teacher. The fake sweetness of her voice, the pretend grandmotherly laugh. It was all falling away. I saw the phrase for what it was. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a joke. It was a declaration. It meant, we know what you are, and we are coming for you. The kindness was the most brutal part. A way to mock me, to show me how easily they could lie, how easily they could put on a mask. This small, gentle old woman was their general, and she had just put a knife to my throat while smiling in my face. A wave of heat flooded my body. The energy from the prednisone, that clean, humming power, turned into something hot and violent. It needed to get out. I couldn't just sit here and wait for them to make their next move. I had to expose them, right now. I stood up so fast, the chair I was on screeched and tipped over, hitting the floor with a loud crack. I didn't care. I threw the classroom door open and stalked into the empty hallway. And there she was, about 50 feet down the hall, standing right next to the principal. They were talking quietly, their heads close together. Of course, she was reporting back to him, the foot soldier giving her after-action report to the commander. They both looked up as I came storming towards them. There was a small fold-out table next to them, covered in PTA flyers and bake sale sign-up sheets. I didn't slow down. I put my shoulder into it and sent the whole thing flying. Papers fluttered to the ground as the table crashed against the lockers. The woman let out a little scream. The principal just stared, his mouth open. "You!" I screamed, my voice raw and loud in the hallway. I pointed a shaking finger right at her face. "You fucking bitch. I know what you're doing. I know who you are." Her face was a mask of pure, white-lipped horror. "You think I don't see it? You think I'm stupid? You're the ringleader of this whole fucking thing. You and your little army of spies. You think you can threaten me in my own classroom? You fucking think you can get away with it?" The principal grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and shaking with rage. The woman stood frozen for a second, her whole body trembling, before she let out a sob and practically ran down the hallway. I just stood there breathing hard, my heart hammering. The principal didn't let go of my arm. He just looked at me with a mixture of shock and disgust. "Go home," he said. "Get your things and go home right now. Don't talk to anyone. Just leave." The phone call came the next morning. It was short. I was suspended indefinitely, pending an investigation. I was being placed on mandatory medical leave. I was not to return to school property. The words were cold and formal. A 12-year career ended in a 2-minute conversation. I called my rheumatologist. I told him what happened, my voice flat and dead. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He told me to immediately begin tapering the prednisone. Over the next week, as the dosage dropped, the high, frantic, buzzing energy slowly drained out of me. It was like a fever breaking. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept. The exhaustion was bone deep. The paranoia, the conspiracies, the feeling of being watched. It all just dissolved, like a bad dream after waking up. But it wasn't a dream. The memory of what I did didn't fade with the psychosis. It got sharper, clearer. I could see the woman's kind, wrinkled face twist into a mask of pure terror. I could hear my own voice, a raw, ugly sound, screaming those horrible words at her. I could feel the violence in my own body as I threw the table. It wasn't fuzzy or distant. It was a perfect, high-definition recording that played in my head, on a loop, every waking second. The steroids were gone, but they left something behind. Sanity returned, but it brought no relief. It only brought the crystal clear, indelible knowledge of what I had done. I was a quiet man who had never raised his voice. And in the space of a few minutes, powered by a chemical storm in my brain, I had become a monster. I had terrorized a sweet, gentle old woman, and I had obliterated my life, my job, and my reputation in a single psychotic outburst. I had been sober for 7 years. 7 years of AA meetings, of rebuilding burnt bridges, of learning how to live in the world without a drink in my hand. Sobriety was the foundation of my entire life. I had a decent job in shipping and receiving, a small apartment, and a quiet, predictable routine. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And I had built it myself, one day at a time. It was fragile, and I knew it. I guarded it like a flame in a hurricane. Then one morning, I was helping unload a truck at work and felt a sudden, white-hot tear in my lower back. The pain was immediate and blinding. It was diagnosed as a badly herniated disc. The pain wasn't just pain, it was a constant, grinding presence that took over everything. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand. I spent my days just trying to find a position that didn't feel like I was being stabbed. The quiet life I had built was gone, replaced by a 24/7 battle against my own body. After 2 weeks of trying to tough it out with ibuprofen and ice packs, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to an urgent care clinic, half mad from the pain and lack of sleep. The moment the doctor walked in, before he could even ask my name, I said the words I always had to say. "Before we start, you need to know that I am a recovering alcoholic. I can't take any narcotics." I had said it 100 times to dentists and doctors over the years. It was my shield. The doctor was a friendly guy in his 50s. He listened patiently, nodded, and told me he completely understood. He said he wouldn't give me any of the heavy stuff. He pulled out his prescription pad. "I'm going to give you something called tramadol," he said. "It's a synthetic, so it's not really a true opiate like Oxy or Percocet. It works differently. The potential for abuse is very, very low. It'll just knock out the pain so you can get some physical therapy." His words hit me with a wave of pure, absolute relief. It was like he'd given me a hall pass. It wasn't a real opiate. It wasn't dangerous. It was safe. It wasn't a threat to my 7 years of hard work. It was just medicine for my back. I took the prescription from him, feeling like I had just been pulled from a ledge. I had no idea that he had just handed me a shovel and pointed me toward a brand new grave. The first pill I took did exactly what the doctor promised. Within an hour, the sharp, stabbing pain in my back just turned down. It was still there, but it was a dull, distant ache instead of a screaming siren. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I felt a wave of gratitude for that doctor. He had given me my life back. But then, about 20 minutes later, something else happened. It started as a warmth in my chest that slowly spread through my whole body. It was a comfortable, heavy, pillowy feeling. All the sharp edges of the world went soft, and underneath that warmth was a low, pleasant hum of energy, a quiet confidence. I wasn't just free from pain. I felt good, really good. I knew that feeling. It was the same warm, fuzzy blanket that a six-pack used to give me. The same feeling that led me to ruin my life the first time. The doctor's words echoed in my head. Not a true opiate. Very low abuse potential. But my body wasn't listening to the doctor. It was listening to the drug, and it was screaming a single, terrifying word. More. My prescription was for 1 pill every 6 hours, as needed for pain. For the first few days, I was a saint. I'd wait until the pain was unbearable before I took one. But soon, I started watching the clock. My back might not have been hurting that badly, but I'd think to myself that the last dose was probably wearing off. And it was better to stay ahead of the pain. It was a lie, and I knew it. I wasn't taking it for the pain anymore. I was taking it for the feeling. The 30-day supply started to look small. A week into it, I found myself counting the pills, a cold knot of panic forming in my stomach. The thought of running out was unthinkable. I picked up the phone and called the clinic. I heard myself telling the nurse that the pain was worse than ever, that I was having trouble sleeping. I told her I'd dropped a few pills down the drain by accident. The lies came out so easily, so smoothly. It had been 7 years since I'd had to be this dishonest. It felt horrible, and it felt like coming home. She called in an early refill, no questions asked. My life started to shrink down to the size of that pill bottle. My day wasn't structured by work or meals or sleep anymore. It was structured by the clock on the wall, a countdown to the next dose. The same way I used to measure my life in drinks, I was now measuring it in milligrams. Sobriety had been about freedom, but with a single prescription for a safe drug, I had walked right back into a prison, and this time, the bars were made of pills. It was only 2 weeks after the last refill, but the bottle was almost empty. The panic was a familiar cold feeling in my gut. I called the clinic again, my heart pounding, the old lies ready on my tongue. The nurse sounded hesitant this time. She put me on hold for a long time. Then the doctor himself came on the line. His friendly, understanding tone was gone. It was replaced by something cold and clinical. He told me he had reviewed my file. He said the number of refill requests wasn't consistent with treating a simple back injury. He used the phrase, red flag behavior. He told me, very clearly, that he would not be prescribing me any more tramadol. He suggested I talk to my primary care physician about a long-term pain management plan. And then he wished me luck and hung up. I was cut off. The sickness started about 8 hours later. It came on fast and brutal, so much worse than I ever could have imagined. First came the cold, greasy sweat that soaked my shirt. Then the shaking started, a violent, full-body tremor that made my teeth chatter. The pain in my back roared back to life, but it was different now. It was a raw, electric withdrawal agony. It felt like my bones were screaming. I pulled a muscle in my neck from shivering so hard. My stomach cramped into a tight knot. I was a prisoner inside my own body, and every nerve was on fire. I spent the next few hours pacing my small apartment, a caged animal. The 7 years of sobriety, the meetings, the handshakes, the chips. It all meant nothing. That life was a movie I'd watched about somebody else. I was a fiend, and all I could think about was the fix. In a moment of pure animal panic, I tore open my bathroom medicine cabinet, not even knowing what I was looking for. And then I saw it, tucked behind an old bottle of aspirin, almost hidden. It was the very first bottle of Tramadol, the one from the urgent care clinic, the one I got before the refills started. I grabbed it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the child-proof cap off. I fumbled it open and looked inside. It was more than half full. I didn't think. I didn't count. I just tilted the bottle and poured a huge pile of capsules into my palm, a massive handful. I threw them all in my mouth and frantically gulped them down with handfuls of water from the tap. All I could think was, just one last powerful high. Get me high enough to sleep through this. Get me high enough that I don't have to feel this for one more second. I wanted the high to be a sledgehammer, something to knock me out of my own skin. For a minute, it was. The warmth from the pills washed over me, a thick, heavy wave. It was so much stronger than before. The sharp edges of the withdrawal, the screaming pain in my back, it all just melted away. The quiet I'd been craving was finally here. I remember stumbling to my bed and falling onto it, thinking, just sleep, just let me sleep through it. But I didn't fall asleep. My body was heavy, but my mind was still on. I could feel my breathing slow way down. Each breath was an effort. My heart, which had been hammering, now felt like it was beating in thick mud. A new kind of panic started to set in, a slow, cold dread. This wasn't a high. This was my body shutting down. I tried to move, to get up, but my limbs felt like they were filled with concrete. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the sound of a machine being unplugged. My last thought wasn't about sobriety or my back. It was just a simple, stupid thought. Oh, I took too many. And then it all just went black. The next thing I remember is a bright, painful light. Then a voice. Someone calling my name. I woke up in a hospital bed with my hands in soft restraints. My landlord had come to ask about the rent and used his key when I didn't answer. He found me on the floor, blue. The paramedics had to use Narcan on me 3 times. I had a seizure, a side effect of a massive Tramadol overdose that the doctor had never mentioned. I was minutes away from total respiratory failure. I just lay there listening to the attending physician, and none of it felt real. I lost the job. I lost the apartment. The quiet, stable life I had spent 7 years building was gone in less than a month. It all came crashing down because of a safe pill prescribed by a well-meaning doctor who didn't understand. He didn't see an addict. He just saw a guy with a bad back. The irony is so bitter, it makes me sick. For 7 years, I had walked past liquor stores every day. I had fought that battle and I had won. But I wasn't a recovering Tramadol addict. I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting. The doctor told me it was safe. That was the lie that opened the door, And the addict inside me, the one I thought I had locked away, just walked right through it. It didn't take a bottle of whiskey to destroy my life again. It took a piece of paper in a doctor's hand. And the scariest part is, I know he was trying to help. The danger wasn't malice, it was ignorance. It was a simple solution for a complicated person. And that little white pill he thought was a lifesaver was just a different shaped bullet.